Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us today. Welcome to the CIWI session, Managing Floods and Drought, the Governance Challenges. My name is Ana Núñez. I'm a Senior Planning and Institutional Expert at Deltares, and it's an honor to be your moderator for this session today. We have a session packed with interesting content and amazing speakers. First, we're going to hear a short presentation by Dr. Greg Browder, and he's going to be introducing the main findings of a new report co-authored by the World Bank and Deltares titled An Epic Response, Innovative Governance for Flood and Drought Risk Management. And then we're going to hear a conversation in the form of an interview with two brilliant speakers, Dr. Iman Sayed from Egypt and Mr. Russell Dlamini from the Kingdom of Eswatini. And they're going to be focusing on national strategic planning for water and drought. We really want to hear from you today. So please do leave us any questions or comments and notes you might have on the chat. We have some time after each intervention to respond to your questions. But before we start, we want to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of where are you coming from. So I'm going to ask my colleague Erica to start the poll. And it looks like we already have quite some responses. A lot of people from Europe, Africa as well, and North America and South Asia. Yeah. Fantastic. Let's see if we have a little bit more of responses. Fantastic. Great. Since we have a good representation from each of the regions of the world. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Dr. Greg Browder. He is the lead water resources management specialist at the World Bank, and he will be introducing the EPIC response framework and how national strategic planning is a fundamental tool for flood and drought risk management. Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. I will be sharing a PowerPoint to help you get a better understanding of the EPIC response report that Anna mentioned. Let's see. Can you all see the screen?
Perfect.
Okay, good, thank you. Unfortunately, we just have 10 minutes, so I will just give you some brief highlights of the EPIC response report, and then I'll drill down deeper into the main topic of today, which is national strategic planning for flood and drought risk management. Now, the fundamental premise of the report is that hydroclimatic hazards don't have to become disasters if we proactively manage these risks. Now, we know the social and economic and environmental costs of floods and droughts are huge and growing, and the challenge will only increase with the changing climate. So to help governments around the world, we developed an EPIC response framework. Now, this is just a cute mnemonic device, really, to help us understand what are the key elements of any flood or drought risk management system. Let me quickly run through what an EPIC response framework is. At the very top, we have the enabling conditions. Are the enabling conditions there to ensure success, such as laws and whole society approach and the fundamental hydromet services? The next level is planning at multiple and nested levels, starting with the river basin level. Next, investing in healthy watersheds and water resources infrastructure. Then comes C for controlling. How do we control our water and land resources so that we can minimize risks? And finally, when an extreme hydroclimatic event like a flood or drought strikes, are we monitoring for it? Are we responding when it hits? And can we recover appropriately? Now, all these different elements of an epic response framework work together synergistically, and in the report we explain in a generally downward cascading manner, ultimately resulting in the economic, social, and environmental impacts of an extreme event. But today our topic is really national strategic planning. And that's why I have strategic planning bolded in red at the top. Strategic planning sits at the top of the epic response framework. And it's an important element for assuring that all the other components of an epic response framework are working well. So we want to make the point that it's really important to have interlocking national strategic plans. There's not just one plan, but rather you need at least 3 interlocking plans to really tackle the issue of flood and drought risk management. And these 3 are water resources management plans, disaster risk management plans, and drought management plans. And what we're talking about are strategic plans, not physical plans with investments and things of that nature, which typically take place at the river basin level, but rather a broad overview at the national or provincial or state level. Now, what are some key elements of any strategic plan? Well, first and foremost, it should present a long-term vision along with medium-term goals. It needs to review the sector performance and lessons learned and propose adjustments to laws, policies, programs, how agencies collaborate, and funding. Importantly, it should not mandate specific actions or investments, but rather establish targets and monitoring indicators for the government, and basically provide a roadmap for policymakers and agencies to follow. Ideally, a national strategic plan should be mandated by law. It should be periodic. For example, every 5 or 10 years, it should be refreshed. And very importantly, it should be formally adopted. So it really is the official roadmap for the country or the province or the state. And finally, it needs to be evolutionary and adaptive. It needs to be updated every 5 or 10 years. And as the country grows in sophistication or the challenges that it faces change, and the nature of climate change comes more into focus, it needs to change and evolve over time. So let me make this a little bit more real and give you a couple examples that are presented in the report. For the Water Resources Strategic Plan, we presented the California State Water Plan. This plan has many different dimensions, which are shown in this graphic. It looks at ecosystems, groundwater, water supply reliability, which means droughts, and what happens in when other natural disasters hit, for example, earthquakes, which is very important in California. People and water, how do you get stakeholders involved? You have to look at the water quality dimension and also the flood management dimensions. So it really is done through a lens of sustainability and resilience with a focus on collaboration across sectors, across disciplines, looking at multi-purpose projects, and very important, also looking at multiple sources of financing for investments. So some of the key elements of the California Water Plan is that it started in 1957 and has been updated every 5 years since then. It's one of the oldest running national or state planning processes that exist. And it's really focused on stakeholder collaboration to shape the future of California's water. It can't mandate or authorize spending, but very importantly, in the legislation that authorizes this state plan, it requires policy and lawmakers to take definitive steps to actually realize the strategic recommendations in the plan. Now, in terms of content, California is a large and diverse state, so they broke it up into 12 hydrographic planning units. And the report presents 40 resource management strategies organized around the 6 themes I mentioned in the previous slide. So each region can draw upon these 40 resource management strategies, develop their own portfolio of strategies that are appropriate for that specific region. Let us now turn our attention to disaster risk management plans. The report presented the case of the Philippines. And here's a graphic showing the basic structure of the Philippines National Disaster Management Plan. It basically follows the disaster risk management cycle. It looks at prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, rehabilitation, and recovery. Some of the key elements of the Philippines National Plan is they've gone through 2 iterations so far, first in 2000, and then it was updated in 2020. It takes an all hazards approach, looking at storms, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, for example, and it looks through everything looks at everything with a resilience frame. It's organized around the 4 themes that I mentioned in the previous slides. And the 2020 version looked at implementation progress and lessons learned over the past decade. And for the next 10 years, it presents outcomes, outputs, some key activities, indicators, who are the lead agencies and partners, and very importantly, a timeline for moving forward. Now, the third national strategic plan that is highlighted in the report is a drought strategic plan. Here's an example of the Eswatini National Drought Plan, which will be discussed in more detail later on in the session. Now, some of the key elements of any drought plan is first and foremost, it has to be a broad multi-sectoral effort. It has to include water resource management agencies, agriculture, hydromet, disaster risk management, and environment, as well as a broad array of stakeholders. And it really seeks to better understand drought risk and vulnerabilities in the country, to improve interagency and intergovernmental coordination, which is really important given the multi-sectoral nature of drought risk management, and help all these stakeholders prepare for and mitigate drought hazards. Monitoring and forecasting is extremely important because, as we know, droughts are a slow-moving phenomena, and you really have to keep track of how it's evolving and what the impacts on the ground are. A drought plan also really emphasizes the importance of communication and education, so people are ready for droughts when they occur. And finally, and of course, most importantly, helps respond to droughts and recover from them. So as I mentioned, these 3 plans need to be interlocking, and this requires a high degree of interagency collaboration, what we call a joined up government effort in the report. For example, water resources management strategic plans absolutely have to deal with floods and droughts, but that's not enough. Other types of strategic planning also have to interlock with this. For example, disaster risk management is a very important part of flood risk management. So the water resource management strategic plan and the disaster risk management plan have to be interlocking. The same thing about droughts. Of course, water resource management has to deal with droughts. And of course, DRM has to deal with droughts. But drought risk management is a much broader affair. It has to include environmental agencies and environmental agriculture and hydromet agencies. So we recommend in the report a standalone drought national strategic plan as well. Now, I realize I went over this very quickly. The rest of this session today, we'll have focused discussions on water plan in Egypt and the drought plan in Eswatini to add more insight to this. And I would really encourage everyone to please go to the website, just type in EPIC, go to Google, just type in EPIC Response World Bank or Deltares, and you'll see we have a whole set of products, main report, executive summary, brochure, some info videos. So please, if you're interested, follow up with those products. So thank you very much. And Anna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Greg, for introducing the EPIC response framework. What a comprehensive new perspective that hopefully will help national governments and practitioners to manage floods and droughts in a combined manner. I've seen in the chat there is actually quite some echo. Adam Biddle mentioned he's an author of the drought plan in the Yorkshire area, and he mentioned that it's complicated sometimes to create that that collaboration with other colleagues to do flood and drought planning together. There is a question here for you. It seems like a follow-up question from this concept of interlocking national strategic plan for water resources, DRM, and drought. It says, nowadays, water resources management plans are based in the concept of integrated water resources management, and as such, IWRM plans already should pay attention to flood and drought. What do you think is still needed to make specific plans for floods and droughts, Greg?
Yes, excellent question. And IWRM, of course, is a central unifying concept for floods and droughts. But we have to realize also the limitations of any IWRM planning process. And now we're talking at the national or provincial strategic level, not necessarily at, for example, the basin level, but at the national strategic level. So, our focus in the report is really flood and drought risk management. So to really get to the heart of flood risk management, you have to deal with the disaster risk management aspects as well. For example, monitoring and responding to droughts and to floods and recovering from floods. So these are issues that are best addressed comprehensively through the DRM process. Of course, the IWRM national level strategic planning has to take it into consideration, but really the disaster response and recovery dimensions are best handled through the disaster risk management planning process. The same goes for droughts. Of course, a national level IWRM approach has to look at droughts. But as I mentioned, drought is a much broader collaborative effort, as one of the participants noted. You really need to bring in agriculture and environment, and social protection is also a very important dimension of drought risk management. So when a drought hits, you have the social systems in place to take care of the needs of the vulnerable. So this is why we really stress the interlocking nature. No one strategic planning process can cover all of the different dimensions of flood and drought risk management. And this is why we really need a collaborative, joined up government effort. So thank you. I hope that addressed your question.
Thank you, Greg. Really interesting concept, the overlapping and the areas of the plans that need to go a little bit further. So that's actually a great segue to our next conversation. Let's dive into a conversation now about national strategic water resources planning and how it can be used to manage floods and droughts combined. So it's an honor for me to introduce Dr. Eman Sayed. She is the head of the planning sector at the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation in Egypt. Dr. Eman has more than 20 years of experience in water resources management and planning, and she has developed impressive projects and analytical work in water resources management in the Nile Delta. She's quite the expert there. Dr. Eman will be interviewed by my dear colleague, Tiara Fani Hermawan. She's a researcher in flood and drought risk deltares. And please, if you have any questions for Dr. Eman or for Fani, please leave them at the chat. Fani, Dr. Eman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. And Dr. Eman, thank you for being here. Always great to see you. I look forward to our conversation. One of the main messages in the report entitled The Epic Response, Innovative Governance for Flood and Drought Management is that the national strategic plans are a great opportunity and tools to look systematically at the combined management of flood and drought, as well as fostering the interagency collaboration. Can you please briefly share with our audience the main flood and drought challenges that Egypt faces, as well as how Egypt national water resources plans incorporate both flood and drought management?
Let me start to introduce the situation in Egypt. Actually, we are in a scarce region and we depend only on the Nile River as the main source, and about 97% of our water resources is from the Nile. However, we have very rare amount of rainfall, which come usually in winter, and those rainfall sometimes cause a lot of floods. So we are a scarce country and we have to deal with all time with a drought. However, in very short time during the year, we have a lot of floods. We have two severe events in 2015 and in 2017. Also in 2020, we have a lot of rainfall started to precipitate only in few minutes and cause a lot of damage. So Egypt started several years ago to have a national water resource plan where we identified a set of measures dealing with drought and with scarcity, another set of measures dealing with flash floods, used to be in remote areas in Sinai and Red Sea. However, recently we face a lot of rainfall in Cairo, which is a very dry city, but it happens one time to receive more than 40 millimeter of rainfall in one day, which is a huge amount of water, causes a lot of damage in Cairo. We have set with our colleague in all ministries, we have an interministerial committee headed by the Prime Minister, and this committee meted regularly. And we have another technical committee for another level to assign different measures for each ministry. We agreed with our colleague in Ministry of Housing, for example, to start to have a huge amount of desalinated water for the coastal area. We are a scarce country. We don't have the lavage to transfer water from Nile to the coastal area. Also, we have a lot of measures regarding the water treatments. For the flash flood, we set strategic activities like catalog for the hazard area and where we will face a flash flood. And then we have some projects started 4 years ago, and we already implemented 1,500 constructions to save areas from flash flood. And we spend about 5 billion Egyptian pound to save those areas. Now we use the small amount of water which is used to come in winter, and we store this amount to help us in some places where we don't have any service water. We have dams, small dams, and we have also lakes. We have small reservoirs, underground reservoirs, to save the small amount which help our Bedouin people and our people in remote areas to use such amount of water to live all the year. Recently also we developed early warning system to alert all people in the country to be aware and to be ready for any flash flood which cause a lot of deaths in past.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Eman, because we know quite well about the drought in Egypt, but also thank you for highlighting the challenges and the extensive measures from early warning to catalogs about the flash flood. So very informative. And also it's very interesting to see the initiative of different initiatives to simulate the interagency collaborations. My next question is about the resilient infrastructure management. Infrastructure, both green and gray, is a fundamental element of flood and drought management. Can you tell us a little more about the role of infrastructure in flood and drought management in Egypt, as well as the system that the government has in place for the operation of the safety management of the infrastructure?
So actually in Egypt, we have the High Aswan Dam, which is the main valve, which is the safety valve of Egypt. We use this dam, which is the biggest reservoir in Africa till now, to help in balancing between the flood and the drought. During the drought period, which is happened 20 years ago, we use the water saved in High Aswan Dam to fulfill the needs and all water requirement for all sectors during the high flood, which we already used to receive high amount of water 2 years ago, and the flood from Nile is classified as a dangerous one and the highest one from several years ago. High Aswan Dam helped us to save and to protect our villages, our all lands, and we used to work on high level and also started to release more water to wash the streams. As you know, the network in Egypt, it's about 50,000 kilometers from drains and canals. So releasing more water in the drought area works as washing them. Also, we have different construction on the Nile itself. We have Naga Hammadi Barrage, we have Asud Barrage, and also we have Isna Barrage. Those are main infrastructure on the Nile. Egypt takes the initiative to replace all those barrages several years ago, and we will start soon to reconstruct Dairut Barrage. This is a strategic plan for replacement and for rehabilitation of the grand barrages on the Nile. They are work also as a safety and the secondary safety on the Nile to save lands from any flood during high level and during the flood areas. However, also we have additional measures during drought seasons. During drought, we reduce the amount of land cultivated with rice. As you may know, Egypt is one of the biggest area cultivating rice, and rice is high consuming of water. Farmers like rice because they use it for their food. They are poor and they depend on rice to be eaten all over the year. So also we started to reduce the amount of water. We have plans with Ministry of Housing to have a level of pricing of drinking water, and also to have regulation for all people to limit drinking water in different activities.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Eman. What an interesting point regarding the implication of High Aswan, which is a multi-objective reservoir, but also how you operate the barrages. I think that's very interesting also for everyone to learn. And connected to the previous questions, because you mentioned about farmers and agriculture, I would like to ask about the climate smart agriculture, because a healthy watershed are the first in line of defense of flood and drought, as they help to reduce the hazard through natural processes. Maintaining a healthy watershed has profound implication on land management, especially on agriculture and forestry. On the other hand, climate change is expected to further worsen the water scarcity. And with the rising annual mean temperature, but also increased variability in rainfall patterns. But moreover, we see a lot of climate models that suggest that the sea level in Eastern Mediterranean maybe render a large proportion of the Nile Delta unsuitable for agriculture. Well, the Delta is the Egypt breadbasket. And how is Egypt preparing its agricultural sector for the current and climate-related challenges? And still have food security in the country.
Also, the agriculture sector has a lot of social dimension in the country. As you know, the poor farmer depend on agriculture, and they used to eat from the product and from the crops. So Egypt started to have some mega project in the agriculture, help the agriculture sector. Let me refer to the Canal Rehabilitation Project, which is Egypt takes the initiative to rehabilitate and to line about 2,000 kilometers of canals. This lining helped to solve any problem on the field level. The water delivered to the end of the canals in no time, and reduce the losses in this area, increase field efficiency. In the same time, we have a new initiative to transfer about 4 million faddan from flood irrigation to modern irrigation. This is a presidential initiative. And we, in this regard, the country started to avail the fund from the local banks, from the national banks, and the government is paying the interest. So we give the farmers loans, and we give them 1 year as exception, not to pay the loan, and they start to pay back after 1 year for 10 years. So this initiative is very good and helped the farmer to transfer to modern irrigation. In this area, they increase their production. Not only they save water, but they increase their production, they increase their income. And also we started to use new modern in agriculture sector, besides the modern irrigation, which is drip and sprinkler. We started to use the soil munchers, and we have different level of smart irrigation, starting from soil muncher and learning the farmer not to irrigate until you find your soil need and your crop need to be irrigated. And also we have another applications sending to the farmers SMS on mobile, telling them information about their system until we have full automated system. And also in this regard, we have another project for greenhouses cultivation. This is on the operational level. On the planning level, we issued the water accounting with help of EU and FEO. This water accounting unit helping the ministry to identify where we have hotspots, where we have excess water, and to have a trend about the water uses in different areas in the country, where we can save more water and where we have to give more water. I guess Egypt started to highlight a lot of measures in the agriculture sector, as well as drinking water sector. Also, we have a lot of mega projects in this area.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Eman, for pointing out the role of Egypt government in providing support to the farmer by modernizing and also use the smart irrigation through infrastructure, because you mentioned increase in field efficiency, drip, but also you give technical assistance and the new technologies as water accounting and greenhouse. And I'm sure that it will help them improve the productivity and the resilience of their agricultural system. And for me, I'm especially very impressed with the financing part of these mega projects. So let me give back the floor to Anna, so she can read some questions that the audience have been putting into the chat. And Anna, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Fanny. We've had quite a bit of actions here at the chat. I've noticed also that we're kind of like running a little bit behind. So perhaps let me just combine a few questions. Many of the participants in the chat are noticing that, you know, especially when we zoom into these national water resources management plans, that it's really complicated to create really this interagency collaboration. You know, there's sometimes a lack of data or a lack of capacity. So, Dr. Eman, what advice would you give perhaps to countries that are, you know, yet to develop or in early stages of developing national water resources plans? What advice would you give them, especially around interagency collaboration?
Actually, the National Water Resource Plan and its framework is not an easy task. To have agreement among 9 ministries, we in the National Water Resource Plan, we have 9 ministries. Either they are the main responsible about the water uses, Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Environment, and also the financing agency, Ministry of Finance and Planning, other ministries. All staff working for each ministry would like to maximize the benefit from the plan and to reduce their responsibilities. For example, our colleague in Ministry of Housing denied at the beginning to have a huge program for desalination. They thought it's a huge investment as not strategic. However, we started to have a lot of discussion and we raised it to the cabinet and sometimes to the president. We have increase in population and we have a lot of development plans and new cities. We are not able to avail the quotation for water to all these investments. So we started to shift their thinking to desalination and also to use brackish groundwater in remote areas. For example, our colleague in Ministry of Agriculture, at the beginning, they deny again the modern irrigation, and they thought the farmer used to use flood irrigation. So a lot of technical debate, a lot of institutional debate, who will report to whom. Also, most of ministries would like to report directly to the cabinet. However, in the National Water Resource Plan, we have another structure, and we have Ministry of Water Resources. The minister himself follow the activities, follow the measures. So we started gradually meetings, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, and even meetings at the cabinet level, sometime fighting with our colleague. But at the end, we have the National Water Resource Plan. We have it endorsed by the parliament, and we also disseminate this plan in the media, and we started to talk to all the people and to farmers about our plan, our situation, and now we are in the implementation stage, I guess.
Roman, thank you so much for such a candid explanation of it. It is indeed so complex to get 9 ministries together towards the same direction, but that's the way to go. Congratulations. Let me just move quickly to our next session, because we're running a little bit out of time. Our next conversation is with Mr. Russell Dlamini, and we're going to be talking about a national strategic drought planning. So Mr. Russell Dlamini is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Disaster Management Agency at the Kingdom of Eswatini. And Mr. Dlamini is an accomplished and resourceful leader with extensive national and international experience at the technical field and the leadership level. And he has worked in both the development and the humanitarian sectors for the government of Eswatini, but also for World Vision and NGO. Mr. Dlamini will be interviewed by my dear colleague, Nathan Engel. He's a senior climate specialist at the World Bank. So please continue the conversation at the chat, and over to you, Nathan and Dr.
Thanks.
Dlamini.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Russell, it's great to see you as always. So thank you so much for participating in this chat. I'm just going to dive right in. And just to set the context, the Kingdom of Eswatini is a small landlocked country in Southern Africa, bordered by South Africa and Mozambique. And it's extremely prone, as much of the region is, to the hazard of drought. The country recently completed, as Greg said in his presentation, a national drought plan. So a two-part question for you. I was wondering if you could describe very briefly some of the major themes of the drought plan. And something else Greg said in his presentation was that drought planning really does require interagency collaboration. So what was the role, or what has been the role of the National Disaster Management Agency in supporting or leading this interagency collaboration?
Thanks, Nate, and good morning and good afternoon to colleagues and all the rest of the listeners. The National Disaster Management Agency is actually the principal institution in disaster risk management in the country. And that gives us the convening power at the national level. And because of that, we were able to, as the National Disaster Management Agency, to initiate the formulation of the drought management plan. We initiated it, but although we initiated it, it was led by the Ministry of Agriculture. And our role there was to initiate it, but also to bring different stakeholders to participate in the formulation of the drought plan. Also to bring in various technical expertise in the formulation of the drought plan, just to make it comprehensive.
Excellent. So, one of the things that I think is really important about this interagency collaboration is that when you see it on paper and in a plan, it's one thing, but to actually realize this interagency collaboration in practice is another thing. And I know that the Kingdom has been doing a lot over the last couple of years to set up a monitoring and early warning system for droughts. So can you describe more the institutional elements of how this drought monitor and early warning system has potentially helped to facilitate this interagency collaboration?
Thank you. We set out to undertake a comprehensive multi-sectoral risk assessment in the country, and that clearly requires multi-stakeholders to participate in it. And as we were doing that, we've had to as well undertake capacity assessment for the National Disaster Management Agency, but also for the other stakeholders that are involved in drought management. And so because of that assessment, we identified gaps that actually need us to fill in order to be able to come up with the right output. But one thing that has come out clearly, I mean, the drought management plan covers all the three pillars of drought management, and so we've had to define the roles of each of the major stakeholders during the interaction. But also one other important aspect is actually to create the ownership of the drought management plan as well by all the various stakeholders, and also to ensure that drought is also not just looked at from the perspective of agriculture, but from the perspective of water resource management, but also from the perspective of municipalities and how it affects municipalities.
Thanks. And on that point about the different perspectives, and I know you mentioned water resources management there. As I noted in the beginning, Eswatini is bordered by a couple of other countries in the Southern Africa region, and you obviously share water resources. So I was wondering if you could describe what, if any, the collaboration there is around drought management with some of the other countries there that are your neighbors, and also maybe getting into the flood management area too, because I know that the National Disaster Management Agency is also responsible for helping with that too.
Thank you, Nate. We've been fortunate to be part of capacity building initiative, and actually as well as a scoping initiative on what we needed to do on drought management. We've participated in a capacity building exercise with various countries, Botswana, where we've had to undertake a trip as well to the US to learn more on how we can actually do this the best way we could. And so that has actually helped in building the capacity of all the various countries. And we've also had exchange programs where people from other countries, Lesotho, Botswana, and Namibia coming into the country, and then our staff also going there, just to share the lessons and to build our capacity. But we also have had significant input from the World Bank, providing that technical capacity, just to make sure that we get it right the first time. But I will also want to mention that we also tap from the regional bodies where we are actively involved, such as the RIASCO and the SADC Climate Outlook Forum, who would normally be sharing information to us, and then at the local level, that's when we begin to convene stakeholders to look at whatever information they've shared with us.
Thank you. So I think that's really wonderful to hear about the collaborations that you've been having with some of the neighbors and the exchanges, and it's really encouraging. And you just mentioned the local level. So one last question, if I can squeeze it in, is just about the local level. And one thing that's impressed me a lot about Eswatini and what the National Disaster Management Agency has been doing is really this whole of society approach, which is pivotal to the EPIC response framework. And by that, I mean, specifically, I'm referring to the citizen scientists that you've enabled and the volunteers you've enabled within the kingdom. Can you describe that a little bit more, just briefly, on how that helps to bring in a more inclusive approach to disaster management?
Indeed, Nate, that's one of the exciting aspects of the work that we have been doing that also, surprised us. We have 59 constituencies in the country, and then we identified quite a number of volunteers, what we call the citizen scientists, who are actually responsible. They act as sensors, in the various communities. So they provide feedback to the National Disaster Management Agency, and that feedback is used to strengthen the drought monitor that we've just developed in partnership with the World Bank. And so we also bounce back the drought monitor, the information that is produced with the drought monitor, to them. And they also help validate that. And so they provide the feedback, they help to validate the drought monitor, but also then help to they become users, the information of the drought monitor, and also disseminate that information at their local level. So it's really a very interesting phenomenon that we are working with citizen scientists across all constituencies in the country.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, it's very impressive and quite an important role for the validation of the monitor, as we well know. So thank you so much, Russell. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Anna for perhaps she can squeeze in a question or two before we do our wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Chad has been yeah, there's still some action here in the chat, but perhaps Mr. Dlamini, would you mind expanding a little bit more on how it is that the floods, the flood, it's also managed by your agency, and how are you trying to manage them together with droughts?
Thank you. Well, it's in the country, it will either be a drought or there's going to be flooding. So if it's flooding, usually affects because of our landscape, we would normally have riverine flooding or flooding of waterlands, or affecting people who have actually constructed, infrastructure on the waterways. And so the National Disaster Management Agency has this convening power. So we actually a coordinating agency. So when we are planning for the drought, we also plan for, for the flood. We also have flood assessments. When we developed the drought risks, we also, develop the flood risks profiles, for the country. And so, and also as the coordinating agency, we are responsible for the response. As you would know, the 3 pillars also include the mitigation and the response aspects of that. And so we just ensure, the appropriate response is planned for, and that is undertaken at the end.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini, for illuminating us on how the Kingdom of Eswatini is managing both floods and droughts. Let me move on. I'm looking at the time. So I think it's about time now to welcome Professor Elko van Beek. He's a water resources management expert at Deltares and an emeritus professor at the Delft University, for some concluding remarks. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks, Dr. Eeman and Mr. Dlamini, for your invaluable information on the applicability of the EPIC framework in your countries. I enjoyed the interviews and the discussion, and yeah, what I might take-home messages. Then, first of all, it was mentioned by both Dr. Eman and Ms. Dlamini, is that floods and droughts seem to be opposite events, but managing them together proves to result in an improved situation, performance of the water system. Dr. Eman showed nicely how handling the flash floods in northern Egypt not only avoids the damage of the floods, but also when harvested provides valuable water for crops to be used during dry periods. And also Mr. Dlamini just mentioned about that you have to handle them together for the benefit of both of them. And let's not forget that floods also bring benefits. And take Egypt again as an example. Egypt's high productive agriculture originates from the yearly floodings from the Nile, the yearly floodings that brought fertile sediment. And of course, these yearly floodings are now finished now after the construction of the Aswan Dam and Lake Nasser, but the fertility of the valley and the delta remains. So floods can bring benefits. And that is also what is realized now in my own country, the Netherlands, we concluded that managing floods in a different way is one of the most promising measures to reduce droughts. Not anymore what we have been doing, trying to get rid of the floods as soon as possible, but trying to harvest that water, preferably using the groundwater systems. In practice, by the way, that is used already in many dry countries, but now also in the Netherlands, we are convinced that this is a solution. Use floods for fighting droughts. Floods bring benefits. Now, maybe my second take-home message is that it's planning, that being an essential component of managing floods and droughts. It might look that they are only paper, that there are other reports, but it provides a framework for initiating and coordinating the actual actions on floods and droughts. And it was nice to see that in both countries, those planning frameworks are in place. And also that I appreciate that was done by means of interagency cooperation. Mentioned by both of the interviewees that those interagency cooperation is needed to mitigate the impacts of the floods and the drought event, in particular on the vulnerability and exposure of the people. And this is one of the main elements that also the EPIC framework emphasizes. And there are many more interesting points I could highlight from the interviews. The cross-sectoral and an integrated approach, the climate resilient agriculture, and the smart agriculture, the whole of society approach mentioned by Mr. Dlamini. They all fit nicely in the overall EPIC framework. So thank you for these highlights. Now we have to close the session now, but before I do that, I would like to draw the attention of all the participants for a follow-up of these sessions. This hour we talked about governance, the governance challenges of floods and droughts. On Thursday, GWP and WMO organized a session on the technical challenges of managing floods and droughts. And we welcome you to attend that session also. It is on Thursday, 10 o'clock Central European time. So please join that session also. It is in addition to what we have been discussing today. So with this, I'd like to thank all participants for being with us in this important session, I believe, to address the governance challenges, floods and droughts by featuring this applicability of this framework on Egypt and Eswatini. Thanks to our presenter, Greg, and our interviewers, Tia Ravani and Nate, and special thanking also Dr. Aman and Mr. Dlamini for their contributions. And of course, thanks to our moderator, Anna, and our technical support, Aisa and Erika. You will see at the screen now the main report, executive summary and brochure that you can download. Greg mentioned it already, please do that. We will also try, we have seen many questions that we could not address. We will try to answer these questions by email. So, and not everybody has added their email to the questions. Please, if you like to have our views on your questions and your email is not registered at CV, please add that your email to those questions. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the Stockholm Water Week. Thank you.